All right, I think we are live. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to a new crusade. Today I am here with Hickman. You may know him as being a very popular and controversial thinker and writer, especially on X, where people like to tell him how wrong he is all the time. I personally found him at the beginning of this year, I believe, and I've really enjoyed reading his stuff. His wife also writes, and she has very interesting perspective as well. So today we have Hickman on to give his perspective just about a bunch of different stuff. Would you like to introduce yourself to everyone?
Yes, sir. My name's Andy Hickman, and I live in northern New York State, where I grew up. And yeah, I rambled around the country for a lot of years. I haven't really stayed in one place for over a decade, and served in the United States Coast Guard, and then suddenly found myself getting married to a wonderful woman from Montana, and became a travel writer, and just almost by accident. So here I am.
Awesome. So one of the things that I really like about your writing, it reminds me a lot. My dad grew up on the Rio Grande in New Mexico growing up. They'd go there for they'd spend the entire summer there in a double wide with his grandparents. And he talks about just you just disappear all day and you're floating in tires down the river and just doing whatever. And they owned a bait and tackle shop and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of that, just kind of that more Wild West, I'm from the West, that Western feeling, there's not as much, nothing here is as old. And I kind of get a lot of that appreciation from your writing. And I've really appreciated that reading that. I think it's very interesting, but it's funny because you and I come from very different backgrounds.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, out here it's like old country. Like when I was a little kid, I grew up in a house that was built in 1797, right? And it's unless you're in an old adobe mission in a handful of towns out your way. I mean, you're not going to find that mostly. It's all 1945 or whatever. Recent. So
Yeah.
yeah.
It's very interesting. And then I think the first thing that really caused me to notice you was you had posted something or other basically saying if you want to save money, you don't need to buy your own laundry machine. If you live by a river, throw your clothes in the river and clean them. And I was like, and I think maybe it was just the river. That's what reminded me of my dad. But I was like, man, that's something that he would have talked about, from growing up. It's something I really
Yeah.
appreciate, especially because they grew up real poor. So it was something I found real interesting.
There's free energy hanging out at every corner of this earth, and if you can harness it, then that's less money you got to spend and less work you got to do and more free time you can do whatever you want with.
Exactly.
So
There you go. Yeah, I
yeah.
like that. And did you kind of grow up with this more do-it-yourself, kind of independent, frugal, for lack of a better term, mindset, or is this something you've kind of come to and adapted over time?
Yeah, no, my uncle, who has the same name as me, my uncle Andy, he he kind of instilled those values into me at a young age. He never liked the term redneck or hillbilly. He always liked the term woodchuck. And he said, a woodchuck, what's it do? It sits in its burrow. It sort of chills out. It's never in a hurry. And they're very, by his depiction anyway, very frugal. And so he's always into frugality. And he would brag. Every time he got a good deal, he would brag. Oh, I got this chicken on sale, manager special for 59 cents a pound or whatever. And it would make him enjoy the meal more. And I always sort of like as a kid, I was like, why do you like it so much? And he must have told me, the less money I spend, the more of my money I keep and the less
Mhm.
that I got to work. And it's like such a simple principle. But when you say it in broad daylight in 2025 United States, people act like it's almost countercultural. But it used to be just conventional wisdom that was even celebrated in the American culture. We just lost it somewhere
Mhm.
along the way. So
Yeah, definitely. Do you think that there is, because I think that there's a difference generally between kind of what a lot of what you've advocated for, which is like extreme out of the box frugality, right? Is maybe one way of saying it, very, very, authentic, like thinking of new things that, or a lot of times you actually say old things, but kind of bringing back old things or thinking of new things. But it seems that there's even just been a general, even just general kind of penny pinching couponing style is not even really a fashion anymore. You know, there used to be couponing clubs and stuff like that. And it doesn't even seem like that's a force in society anymore.
No, it isn't. It isn't. And you're right. I think I take it one step further because, as a kid, I get exposed to my uncle's way of thinking, and some of my other family members think the same way. But I was a voracious reader as a kid, and I read a lot about anthropology, and I got it in my head. Human beings have been human beings for how many thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years, depending on who you ask. And so, what did the majority of human beings do across time? They didn't do what we're doing now. Even agriculture didn't get popular until the last 3% of human history. So we have a lot of history of nomadic hunter gatherers, nomadic pastoralists, and things of that nature, which to me, by the numbers, and maybe it's like a autistic kind of thing, but that's the actual baseline of what the human race is like running around with spears and dirt shacks.
Mhm.
Everything else we're doing is an experiment. So if I'm going to take it as a foregone conclusion that I have to live the way of life that was common in 1953 or 1983 or 2003 or 2023, each of these is radically different from the last. Okay.
Mhm.
So which one do I choose? Do I have to pick the current one or I'm a moral failure? The whole thing is it's a house built on a foundation of sand.
Mhm.
So I got to go back to basics and say, let's go back to the origin point for the human race and wherever it makes sense to do so, adopt modern technologies. Obviously, like if I had an ear infection years ago, it made me deaf in my ear, and so I took a bovine tetracycline. I got it Tractor Supply in Yuma. I got it and I took it, and it healed my ear. Right? That's
Mhm.
not something they did 10,000 years ago. They didn't do that.
Mhm.
So I opted to do the modern thing. There's a lot of times where it makes sense to do that. You see,
Yeah,
so
definitely. So it's not about just being a Luddite and Ted Kaczynski in the woods and, complete rejection. Obviously, you put your ideas out there on the internet, you engage in, online. I think that one of the interesting things is that you kind of exist in a weird middle point. There is a lot of farming and ranching. A lot of it gets, for reasons I'm not necessarily 100% sure why, mixed in with a lot of the different like traditional Christianity stuff. Some of it is independent of that. You kind of get lumped in there. You kind of get lumped in with, I guess you might call it just like the do it yourself mentality people, like the don't worry, just find a way to do it. There's a lot of different groups that you kind of float between. And it seems like anytime you say something that doesn't agree with one group, they're kind of happy to pile on to you. I'm curious, that's what I've seen from the outside. I'm curious what your experience is.
yeah, it's nonstop madness. I mean, it's been interesting because
Hmm.
it's the digital. I mean, okay, you want to talk about the origins of mankind and all this stuff. One thing that's ancient to human beings is the desire for a public square. And in that there's this kind of mob mentality of this one thing comes and then another thing comes and everybody's talking and, oh, look at that guy's crazy and he's wrong and that guy's a hero, right? We all want to do this. That's why we engaged in the television era with television shows and television news and television politics, and that moved seamlessly to social media, which is a real-time granular recapitulation of that idea. And yeah, I mean, if you gain traction and followers on here, you're no matter what you do, it's like being in a leadership position. If you're in a leadership position, you can't make everybody happy. Somebody's going to hate you for being a good leader. And if nobody hates you, you might be a good leader today, but on the broad arc of things, you're going to be a terrible leader because sometimes you got to do things people don't want you to do,
Yeah.
right? And it's the same way when you get a following on here. It's like no matter what I say, somebody's going to jump down my throat. Certain things I say, somebody's going to hold a grudge, literally sometimes for years, hopping in my replies. I got people tracking down where I live. I got people saying that they're going to kill me. Call me into CPS for doing what I don't know. All kinds of crazy stuff.
Hmm.
That's just how it is. That's where
Yeah.
we're at.
Hmm.
So you gotta ride the lightning. It's like surfing. You gotta just stay on it. yeah, whatever. I'm having fun and I'm laughing at you if you're mad. And that's
Hmm.
what I do. I do. I laugh pretty heavily.
Hmm.
But
Yeah, that is really funny. And one of the funniest things is that, it seems that there's a lot of these kind of outsider groups, there's a lot of orthodoxy in homesteading, but it's still overall they're an outside group, they're a minority. A lot of these other groups, whether it be like anti-vax people or homeschool people or whatever they are, that you just inevitably end up Catholic traditionalists, whatever you inevitably end up overlapping with. But it is funny how quickly once you move outside of the in group of those smaller groups, how quickly there's kind of can be that snapback and that attack. I'd seen that a lot with a lot of like the anti-vax people, for example. Any nuance within there, people will get mad at. In the homeschool, any nuance within the homeschool, if someone says, "Oh, maybe you should send kids to homeschool up to high school," and then you send them to high, whatever these ideas are. A lot of times there's not a lot of freedom of thought, even within these smaller, what are supposed to be more independent communities.
right, right. Yeah, the general motif that I've noticed is we're free thinkers and we've gotten ourselves to this point. But if you go beyond the point that we have attained, then you're every bit as much a pariah as we were when that first bout of free thinking broke us from the mainstream. And
Hmm.
they have their limits. There's always those limits, and dancing on those limits is where the discourse is, and that's where you get all kinds of controversy. So
Yeah.
my goal is just to say, well, there ain't no sacred cows. This is the internet. We log in to see sacred cows get slaughtered. So all right, like I'm just gonna log in and say whatever I'm thinking, and if people don't like it, they can go to hell. I
Yeah.
mean, that's yeah,
Yeah. It's funny how that happens. There's a gentleman I like. His name's Gavin McInnes. He's one of the guys who founded Vice magazine. And he was super into punk music. And now that he's, a father and, a conservative political commentator, he still likes punk music, but he talks about, how dumb a lot of the rules are. And, a punk can't do this with his jacket. He can do this with his jacket. There's a lot of these different communities that kind of form like that. I think it's really interesting. I think it's kind of funny to a certain extent, though. I don't see, and it's almost by design, in like this hobo, traveling, nomadic, whatever it be, gypsies, whatever the in any given place or time this archetype is, that has not turned into a community the way that a lot of these other communities have, and it's not that you're literally, you own a home and have a wife and a child, you're not literally like, taking trains different places at this moment right now, but that is kind of this archetype you represent online.
sure, that's true. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how else to say it. I'm a veteran in a Coast Guard. I served in the Coast Guard, and I feel like a lot of guys, I meet them, I see them, and it's like, oh, you're a veteran. I already know before you've even told me that you
Hmm.
served because I can just tell. And I feel like in the same way, like if you live like the vagabond traveling lifestyle long enough, it's the same way. It's like a tattoo on you, you
Hmm.
know. Um, so there's that, and so even yeah, like even if I'm not currently doing that and really can't because I have a kid, and for all whatever the peanut gallery says about, oh, it's crazy you have a kid and you're talking the way you're talking, it's like, yeah, I'm talking like I take care of my family, like I've who do you think I am? you know um but the reason that there's probably not an internet community too terrible much of these types of people is that most of them, if they're serious, they're not online.
Hmm.
So I wasn't online. I barely had a cell phone for all that time until probably 2019. I got a cell phone when I joined the military, like and actually used it and kept it
Hmm.
on, right? So what I'm running basically, and my detractors can say this all they like. I'm running a dog and pony show for people who ain't living that life.
Hmm.
And guess what? That's my heritage. I'm a direct descendant of Buffalo Bill, who
Hmm.
ran literal dog and pony shows for the benefit of people who had nothing. They didn't know nothing about the West and cowboying and whatever else,
Hmm.
right? So that's what I'm doing. It's an American tradition. It's normal.
Hmm.
I give people an interesting view of something, and then and soon enough, yeah, I'll probably log off for a while. You won't see me, and that's all right.
Yeah. It's funny you said that. I would right when you were saying that, I actually thought exactly about Buffalo Bill. I've spent some time in Cody, Wyoming, which is named after him, and they have the big museum there with all the artifacts and everything. And it's funny, that's exactly what I thought when you were saying that. And I think that I think the difference is that everybody wants to like expose the poser and all this stuff. And I've seen people kind of accuse you of, he says this, he does this. From the outside, I don't feel like you're lying about anything personally. I think that to me, it seems pretty clear. You say, I used to do this. And then people are trying to say, well, he wasn't really doing this. And they're trying to find you, like you were saying, trying to expose you. And so I guess if we could kind of get into a little bit of the history for people who might not know. So when did you start drifting around? What was the start of that in your life?
Well, I'll tell you this. Well, even before I started, even when I was a young boy, I already knew I was going to do it. I told her, I was probably 11, 12 years old, reading maps, world almanac. I'm memorizing all the state capitals. I learned the interstate highway system. I mean, you name it, I was into it. And then I kind of put myself through Hobo College, where I tell my mom, oh, I'm going out, and I go up the hill and I camp out for a week at a time or whatever. And the stated purpose of all that activity was to harden myself up because I was going to hit the road. Now, my mom wanted me to go to college and be a lawyer or some such. And I tried that for a time. The week I turned 17, I left home. I went up to SUNY Plattsburgh, the college up on the Canadian border. I went there and I partied, and I dropped out. And then I went to community college and I dropped out. And then I went to a liberal arts college, and that was specifically for freaks and weirdos, and I dropped out. And so after that, I don't know. I was probably 19, 20. I said, no, I'm going out. At the time, I had a girlfriend. She was from Washington State, and I found my way to Orcas Island, Washington, and caught a ride with some guy. Took me to Seattle, and it was the way I went from there. And I spent from that point a total of 5 years traveling, but about 8 years where I lived with no fixed address and no income, and just kind of made it work.
Mhm.
Um, So that was sort of the beginning then. But then, of course, when I joined the Coast Guard, I PCS. I received permanent change of station orders 5 times in a 4-year enlistment, which is
Mhm.
superlative, I guess. A lot of guys don't get that much, And then afterwards, I fell into the writing thing and sort of, I signed a contract with a magazine. I was a travel writer, so I really haven't stayed anywhere longer than 6 months since I was 16 years old.
Mhm.
So.
Yeah, that is interesting. So, like, when the only context I have for anyone who still lives like this is like country music artists. I know a lot of these country music artists who will busk and who will ride trains, or bluegrass artists, whatever you want to call them. And they, travel around the South, around the West, wherever. A lot of that for a lot of people, when they kind of break out, that's a point of pride for them that they used to go and do that. And so for them, obviously, they can go and take their guitar and go play out in front of wherever it is. There's a country artist I like, and there's a famous video of him busking in front of a casino in Reno, Nevada, and things like that. So how did you pay your way while you were doing that, I guess?
Dude, I did all kinds of stuff. I did all kinds of stuff, and not all of it I'm proud of. I'll say, because I wasn't religious, like
Hmm.
when I was really in the thick of it. Yeah, I had my times. I was like a semi-pro shoplifter, for one, you know. Um, but more than that, I did a lot of dumpster diving. I never paid for a hotel ever. Really, I don't think ever while I was traveling like that. And so keeping the expenses low and living off the waste that I could find was big for me. And I had all kinds of tips and tricks, all kinds of little things you could do, you know. Um, and when I needed money, though there were periods of time where I just didn't use money because I didn't need it. And I was kind of opposed to it. I was an anarchist, anti-capitalist. I was all against the system, kind of on some ideological type of thing.
Hmm.
Um, But when I needed money, I spent a lot of time working with the Mexicans, man. Like a lot of time because it became like a life hack to me. Show up to Home Depot, the contractor loading dock at 5 a.m. with a backpack with lunch and a gallon of water, and necesito trabaja, or whatever. And if you got some basic Spanish, which I learned in high school and a little in college, you can hang with these guys and you're putting down paver bricks for patios, or I picked oranges, I picked dates, I picked lettuce, I picked blueberries and strawberries, or I drove combines, or you name it, I did it if it was low wage work. And I didn't care that the wage was low, because to me, if they give me $100 bill at the end of the day, or even $80, I could stretch that for days and weeks. So all I'd have to do is work this here and there, right?
Mhm.
So, but I did all kinds of other, wherever work was. Craigslist, I found tons of Craigslist work, some of it quite lucrative. Of what was the fella not that long ago? He has a road show of animatronic foam dinosaurs that he bought in Japan, and he
Mhm.
brings them around to do a dinosaur show for the kids. And they're very heavy and annoying to move. You got to
Mhm.
set up the power and all this stuff. He was paying $35 an hour cash to me to just schlep them around and move them, and then we'd pack up and we'd go. It was like kind of like carny stuff, like my father was into.
Mhm.
Boy, the money was good there. Um, but then he left, and I haven't seen him since. Or I'd still probably be doing it, honestly.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's a pretty high wage.
Yeah, yeah.
That's funny. So, you had said I'd heard you post about it too. Same thing, like people were trying to debunk you, claiming you weren't a real communist during all this time. You were not an anarchist, whatever it was. I told you right before we came on here, I really like the political philosophy and all that kind of stuff. So was that part of encouraging you to go out and live like this? Or was the idea to go and travel first and then you kind of fell into the anarchism and such?
No, they were mixed up even at the genesis of the whole thing, really, because um, yeah, I came to conclude as a kid. I mean, I read Ted Kaczynski's Industrial Society and Its Future when I was 14 years old.
Hmm.
And that was during a period of time during which my stepdad and I were fighting, sometimes coming to physical blows. And I would tear off. I'd go up in the hills, and I'd just disappear. Run away from home or whatever. And I'd just go up, and they wouldn't know what I was doing. But I was asking myself the question, why? Because for the first 10 years of my life, I grew up with my grandparents, who are very, regal and decent and, working class folk, but they're kind of Reaganites who better themselves, and they believe in bettering themselves and all that type of thing. And they were doing all right. They had money. Everything was decent. And then I move in with my mom and my stepfather. She's a bartender and he's a fry cook. And I'm living on leftovers from the restaurant he works at. And I'm saying, why is there a difference? Why is
Hmm.
it different? And answering that through an ideological lens and sort of saying, well, wait a second. There's systems of social hierarchy, such as rich and poor and man and woman and all these different ones. And if you want to find the origin of systems of social hierarchy, you have to look at the genesis of human civilization, or agriculture, cities, settlements requiring the routine importation of food and other materials. Okay. And so if I really wanted to oppose the forces that were making me suffer as a kid, I had to oppose civilization itself. And so I adopted an anti civilizational ethic before I'd even begun.
Hmm.
And that just led naturally, because by the time I'm 16, 17, they say, oh, you go to work, or you could join the military, or you could go to college. And I say, well, I don't want to do any of that
Hmm.
at all. So I didn't.
Yeah. It's they talk about well, I know one of the ideas that, Ted Kaczynski kind of talks about, or might have been someone else I'm thinking of, but that, whatever, there's these baseline actions: going out and feeding yourself, finding shelter. These are like the fundamental, like you're saying, this is the baseline. This is without a shadow of a doubt, this is what it means to be human, you know?
Right.
And then everything after that, at what point, I think he uses the term simulacra, you start to engage with fake substitutes for what this is. An obvious example: sports are a simulacra for going and fighting other tribes and for going and hunting your own food and all these kinds of things. So I guess is that something, was it just an ideological shift that allowed you to kind of be okay with engaging with this society that you had initially rejected? What's kind of the path that gets you away from this idea?
Gets me away from the idea now, or then, or what do you mean?
So yeah, I guess just in general. So like, what is the path that what makes it so that you start to reject these ideas? So you said you'd embrace them, obviously, like literally
Oh yeah.
going in, professional shoplifter, occasional wagey is about as far as you can get in that one direction without.
Right. Well, the thing is, and many point this out, and they do so validly. Okay, that for all my talk about nomadic ways of living and so forth that I've experienced most of them, almost all of them, as an isolated actor, which is anthropologically abnormal. This is not a thing that is. If you're going to look into the story of human civilization, there just weren't a lot of Lone Ranger desperado types. It just wasn't a thing.
Mhm.
Okay. And so after so many years of living rough, sleeping rough, and just going wherever with no purpose, my travel was never purposive unless I had a hunch about a girl or something. I never had a reason to go anywhere. I just went. Right. Um, this has no similarity to the tribal nomadic prehistorical early days or what have you. So the loneliness was acute, and it started to really get to me. At first, it's liberating because it's like, well, I got nobody. There ain't nothing going, and I can just do whatever I please. And yeah, if I want to go stand in front of a casino in Reno, I'm free to do so. And I could just go to Connecticut the next week and just say, yeah, well, nobody told me to do it, but I'm doing it, right?
Mhm.
And that feels good until you wake up and you're like, man, I'm doing some of the most enlivening, thrilling stuff in the world, and I got nobody who sees it. I tell my friends back home what I've been doing. They almost don't believe it. I'm not making it up, but it's a thing I got to carry by myself. So I had an encounter with a woman in the Berkshires, and she was saying she wanted to marry me, but of course she didn't, because this is how it goes. You
Mhm.
know, this. I mean, word to the wise. You know, if you drop out of society, there's a lot of rich girls that want to toy with you. And I was naive and dumb. And I said, wow, that's great. Well, after she broke my heart and just left me and didn't go traveling with me or nothing, I said, well, it might not have been her, but I need a woman in my life. So I started looking. And later I found this woman, probably what, a year and a half later, I found a woman down in New Jersey. Nice girl, very smart girl, a risk taker. You know, she can move quick and put her stuff in a backpack and said, I want you to take me hitchhiking. So I did. I took her up to the Adirondacks. I took her to New Brunswick, Canada, and we went all over the place. And well, I fell in love with her. I don't know if it went the other way, but I built a cabin for her on my uncle's property because she had a literary residence thing to do for college in Poland. So she flew to Poland, and I didn't see her, but I remember she said, "Oh, I'd love to live in a cabin someday in the woods." And I said, "Well, my uncle's got some woods. I'll build a cabin." So I worked up 2 grand, and I built a cinder block structure, 8 by 10, nothing big, with a metal roof and wood from my cousin's place. And we went to town, and she got back from Poland, moved in with me, and everything was copacetic. Although to me then, that was high living because I had a wood stove and I had all these big buckets for water and I had all this stuff, and it was great. Um, for her, it was like coming from suburban New Jersey was tough. So
Mhm.
anyway, to make a long story short, springtime comes. It's my birthday in May. She sits me down on a stump in the woods and says, "I got to talk to you," and basically told me in so many words, "You've got to do something with your life, or I can't do this." And always from the dawning day, Plan Z in the far back of my head was, "Oh, I'd join the Coast Guard if I had to." So that day, I called the recruiter, and a few months later, I went to boot camp. Right.
Mhm.
So I tell you all this to say that the catalyst for leaving behind the anarchistic Lone Ranger mentality was I was lonely. I
Hmm.
wanted to I wanted a tribe. I wanted friends. I wanted a family. I wanted a woman. I wanted all that.
Hmm.
And the only way to get it was by rendering unto Caesar. And so I decided, in my usual maximal style, to render unto Caesar in the most extreme way I could, which was to go from being a filthy hobo to being in boot camp in Cape May, New Jersey. And so I did it, you know.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely, I've never had the urge as strong as you did, but I think there's something about growing up in the West and kind of hearing the stories of people older than me and what it was like growing up for them. And it kind of makes you long for something, especially being here in the West, something that's not there anymore, you know? Um, and so that has always been interesting, but yeah, I've always been way too much on the wanting to be around people, you know, side of things.
No, the loneliness will kill you, man. It's not. I don't recommend going there unless you truly, unless you got no other option.
Hmm.
You just don't want to go there. I don't recommend it. I hope I never go back there again. I thank God I got a good wife and a baby now to keep me away from all that craziness because it hurts, you know.
Hmm.
So, but anyway, coming through this and getting into the military, and then
Hmm.
all of a sudden I get to boot camp, man. Every minute of my day, they're telling me what I'm doing. No back talk. It's unequivocal. I got to do it. I was the happiest I'd ever been in my whole life. I loved it. I'd go literally if they called me up and said, "Hey, will you go to boot camp again today?" I'd say, "Yup, put me on the plane. I'm going," because
Hmm.
I loved it that much. I'm not kidding.
Hmm.
And I think to counterbalance and to complete the ideological revolution that undergone in me was the recognition that discipline is valuable. A man does need discipline, and often he needs it from an external source that's bigger than he is. So
Hmm.
this prepped the soil for my reversion to Catholicism a couple years later,
Got
because
it.
it's the same thing. A military and Catholicism, they almost work the same. They're both very bureaucratic. They're both very annoying, but boy, you just die for them. You know what
Mhm.
I mean? And,
Yeah,
uh,
that's funny.
yeah.
So I guess that makes a pretty natural transition. So you said reversion. I didn't know that you were a revert necessarily. What was your faith growing up?
I grew up Catholic.
Hmm.
My grandmother raised me Catholic. For the first 10 years of my life or so, I was a choir boy. I loved it. I mean, I didn't understand it. I
Hmm.
was not well catechized. Well, our church was a very lackadaisical Novus Ordo church with the type of priest who preaches about football and the homily and no and confessions unknown. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? Like very like stuff that thanks be to God, I don't see it very much today. I see a lot. Even the saddest old parishes that just don't have much going on, they at least have a little bit better energy than our place had. But yeah, then my grandparents got a divorce, and I moved in with my mom, who was like a punk almost. Like she,
Hmm.
listened to the Ramones and the Fugees and Red Bukowski, and she's a very bohemian kind of woman, you
Hmm.
know. So we quit going to church, and I didn't think anything about it. I started reading the Tao Te Ching and Buddhist stuff, and you name it. I was kind of interested in it, and kind of fell into that secular left skewing mentality of, oh, the church was this evil, corrupt institution that murdered all these people for no reason, and they're all self-interested crooks or whatever. And I never read about Saint Charles de Foucault or of Saint Francis or any of the saints that actually were doing the thing that the church was made for doing. You know,
Hmm.
so I would encounter that later, but not without a long period of being secular. And then later, I attempted to convert to Eastern Orthodoxy until I found the Latin Mass, and I said, "Wait a minute, why would I join some obscure little ethnic offshoot church when I could just join like the big one?" So that's what
Yeah.
I just did that, and I didn't look back. So
Hmm.
yeah.
That's a clip. I see that coming. You're gonna get some angry Orthodox person tweeting at you.
Well, I I've upset him before, and I don't. What can I say? You
Hmm.
know, I'm not gonna hold back on that.
Yeah, that's fair. So does your reversion happen while you're still in the Coast Guard or is it after?
Yeah, I'm in the Coast Guard at that time. It's COVID. They got us on lockdown. My first chapter in the Coast Guard was excellent because I'm on a 140-foot ice breaking tugboat in Lake Superior, Lake Huron, breaking ice. And boy, I'm an engineer below deck, so they got me turning wrenches and wake up at 3:30 in the morning to do light offs for the engines, and we're out to sea for a week or two at a time. It was great, man. Oh, it was like heaven. And I decided then, oh, I want to be a lifer. I'll just stay doing this because this is fun. And it was nomadic still because we'd go port to port to port to port, and wake up in Alpena and fire it up, and then go up to Mackinac City, and we go all over the place, man. It was awesome. However, then I received my training to get my job, my specific job, instead of just being an ordinary fireman or seaman. And COVID times hit bad. They had us on lockdown, boy, quarantine. I was restricted from the outside world for 11 months, 3 or so of which I was even actually solitary. Um, couldn't see the light of day, nothing. I mean, I didn't see another human being. But just before that time, just before that stint, I had seen my girlfriend, who I joined the military for, and God help me, we were let off base for one weekend, which is the only weekend I'd been let off for. She happened to be on a road trip at that time, going through California where I was at, and so we went up north and went up to Ukiah, and I got her pregnant. So, and then she took off, and then I'm not kidding you, Sonoma County changed their regs at some point that week, and we were back on hard lockdown. I'm sitting in my room again, and then I get the call. She's in Utah, and she says, "Yeah, I think I'm pregnant." And I was jumping for joy because I like the woman. I want to be with the woman. I want to marry her,
Hmm.
right? So we start talking about baby cribs and baby names and re-enlistment contracts, and I thank God I didn't sign one of those. I call her mother. We're crying on the phone. Everything's copacetic, and I'm about to be a father. And really, I'm already feeling the change in me of, I'm a dad now. But it wasn't that long later, she made it to Trenton, New Jersey, and she had the baby aborted and killed,
Mm.
and that was the end of that. And
Sorry to hear.
I wanted to kill myself,
Hmm.
full blown. I was fully ready. And I'm not kidding you. And it didn't go away for a while because later I got stationed in New Orleans, and I'll tell you what, I like to drink. No, like let's not make no bones about it. I like to drink, but boy, I was not. I was drinking, but I wasn't liking drinking. I'll
Hmm.
call it that. And I had my gun, I had everything, and then my buddy said, "Well, you better call the Coast Guard support line." And I talked to the people. Of course, they put me on hold for 9 minutes. I could have blown my brains out 20 times by the time they actually get to me.
Hmm.
And it was a nightmare, man. It was a nightmare. And in the beginning of that whole darkness, that took me really a year to get through. I started praying to Our Father because I remember the Our Father. And then I started Googling. And then I was looking up the other thing and looking this up. And it was anything but Catholic to me then because I was very latently anti Catholic. So I found Eastern Orthodoxy. I start reading about, oh, I like this. I'm listening to the chants, I'm learning the prayers. That's what I want to do. So, anyway, that was how that began. And then
Hmm.
it wasn't until I'd already been a catechumen for 6, 8, 9 months. While it was probably about 8, 9 months in the Greek Orthodox Church that a Catholic hippie who went to all the Greek Orthodox liturgies except Sundays talked to me, and I said, "Buddy, how come you never come on Sundays, but you come all the other times? Sunday's the most important one." And he said, "Oh, because I'm Catholic." And I said, "Catholic? How could you be a Catholic? That lame, fake, phony religion for corrupt, horrible, evil people or whatever." And he said, "Dude, you don't know it, but we have Orthodoxy in the West too." And he invited me to the Latin Mass. And boy, I didn't want to go. I didn't want to go, man. I was all against the papists and getting into the schism, filioque critiques or whatever. And but then I went and they had a shrine to the unborn there, and I man, I was weeping, man. It was it and I just said, this is my patrimony. I'm a Westerner. I'm not Greek. And these old Greek people are like, who the hell is he? Why is he here?
Hmm.
He don't speak Greek, And I just said, you know what, I'm going. And I stuck with it, and I made a general confession, received the Eucharist, and I have never looked back. And that was, I don't know, 5 years ago. So
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm really glad to hear that. That's a really that's a very interesting story. Have you talked about that online or have you written about that? I don't think I've read that.
I have, but at my own peril, because I got all the ortho bros come on to me and they got everything to say. So
Yeah,
I kind of shy away from it sometimes because it's just exhausting.
that's fair.
But
Jay Dyer begging to debate you and
literally did like 2 weeks ago. He DM'd me. I'm like, I'm not doing this, man. I got a different hustle.
yeah, that's fair. So, okay. So you said when did you get? Okay, so when did you get out of the Coast Guard?
Oh, I got out in October of 2023.
Okay, and
So
then go. Sorry, go ahead.
2 years ago, I suppose, just over 2 years ago.
Got it. And
Right?
then between then and now, what's the story? How do you meet your wife? How does all this take place? Because it's a pretty big, in the last 5 years, that's a lot of changes. Joining Coast Guard, have get your first baby, the baby dies or it is aborted. All this is a lot happening. You convert to 1.5 times. um, so, this is a big, and then now you are married and you have your new baby. So what's kind of the process after you get out?
Yeah, I get out against the advice of everybody I know, because they know me. I partly joined the military because I needed a job, and the military is a job that you can't quit. Because I know if I got a regular job, I'd eventually just say, well, why the hell am I doing this? I don't need all this money. This is stupid. So I stuck with the military. Everybody who knows me knows that I did that. And they said, boy, if he gets out, he's going to go out again and he's going to be wandering the earth and we'll probably never see him again. And DTD. I did it anyway because it felt like the right thing. I didn't trust them after they bullied me into getting that stupid COVID vaccine and they had us on lockdown all that time. I didn't trust them anymore. At the
Hmm.
beginning of my enlistment, I trusted them with my whole life, and I have leaders. I had leaders in the Coast Guard, including my old captain Steele Johnson. If he's out there, God bless him. He could call me up today and say, "Hey, go do this, that, and the third," and I just do it because I trust a man with my life.
Hmm.
But once they violated that trust with the Coast Guard, I said, I'm out. I can't do this anymore. So I just figured I'd get out and I'd probably be poor. I bought a house up way in the boonies up north, um, $43,000 on a loan. I didn't have much money. I blew it all. I was a fool, you
Hmm.
know. Um, but I had enough for to buy a house, and I went to the house and I just figured, well, maybe I don't know. I applied to be a TSA agent at a tiny little airport. I applied to be a janitor at a college. I didn't really get any callbacks. I kind of, but then I dragged my feet, and it was this and that, and whatever. And I said, well, whatever. I'll just sit up here and live on the
Hmm.
cheap and work at the dairy farm, which I did a little of that. But then later, not that further into it, actually, just before I got out of the Coast Guard, really, I'd been put in touch with a woman in Montana. And at that time, I sort of figured I'd been through the ringer with women so many times. I said, I can't do it. I'm not going to get married. I'm the guy that's going to just ride off into the sunset and I'm not going to have anybody. And I really genuinely made my peace with that. Well, a girl on Twitter who lives in Canada who I didn't know was practically my neighbor. She lives an hour and a half west of where my house was at. She said, I followed you for a while and I followed this girl for a while, and you two are perfect for each other and you guys need to know each other. And I said, all right, well, give me your number. And so I called her and we talked and we kind of hit it off. Actually, we really hit it off. I send her letters. She really likes my letters. And one thing leads to another. And I find myself driving 36 hours west to Montana to meet her, and I spent 2 weeks out there. I asked her father for permission to court her at a truck stop in Ohio, and he said yes, thank God. And wasn't that long after I proposed to her, and we took off across the states. We went down to Oklahoma, and we come up on the train, and I took her home, and we married.
Hmm.
Um, so that was how that went down. I owe the fact that I'm a married man to Twitter. But as soon as her and I get together, she said, "Those letters you sent me they were so good. All I do is read and all I do is write, and I just love your letters so much. You're a writer and you need to write." And I said, "Yeah, what the hell I got to say? I don't care about that." She said, "No, you should just do it anyway." So I did. And that led to me getting a writing career that is better than anything I did in the Coast Guard. And we're taking care of everything and we do whatever we please. And thank God I got paying subscribers who support what I do, whatever it is I do. I don't know still, but
Hmm.
you know, that's kind of the story there.
There you go. So how long was it between when you first met her in person and when you guys got married?
I had spent not more than 3 weeks with her in person by
Hmm.
the time I was already down on one knee. But I figured, at the time I'm 29 years old. She's 27. I know what I'm looking for. She knows what she's looking for. We're grown adults. We're good.
Hmm.
So, and here we are over 2 years later, and still good. I no regrets. I'll never leave that woman. I'd rather die. I love her so much.
I'm
So,
glad to hear that. That's awesome. Yeah, what was the process like for was the fact that you were Catholic, did that kind of pose any issues? What was that like for her kind of specifically, I guess, before you guys got married? Obviously, it doesn't seem like it was maybe a hurdle, but was it? What was kind of the process like for that?
yeah. Well, her background, as you know, if you read her article today, was Messianic Christians, which is a very obscure, small sect of Old Testament law abiding Christians who are kosher keeping and they don't mix fibers and they have all this stuff. But curiously, they don't stone adulterers. I don't really get it, but anyway, she grew up in that world, and she was fixing to hang on to that. But I told her, I said, "I'm Catholic. I'm never going to give up being Catholic. And as a matter of fact, because I'm Catholic, our kids will be Catholic, and you got to agree to that if you're going to marry me." And I made it pretty clear. And I said, I don't want to walk if you're not willing to do this, but I would
Mhm.
because I just believe in the church. I just know it's true." And she said, "Yeah, all right, that makes sense." But she wasn't fixing to convert. Never thought about it. But on her own, God bless her, she just reads books and she took an interest in it. She started reading about the saints and she went on a deeper dive than I've ever even gone into and come out the other side and said, "Yeah, I think I'd like to convert." And I said to her, I said, "You're not doing that just for my sake, are you?" And she said, "No, on my conscience, I want to convert." So we haven't gotten it done yet because we move all around. It's really hard to get
Yeah.
the sacraments when you don't stay in one place, but that's what she's intended to do. Thank God.
That that's really cool. That's awesome. Yeah, God bless her for that. That's really it seems I always hear that. So the guys will, they want their wife to convert and, a lot of times, they start off making it a problem and then they realize that's not the way to get it to happen. This was my story too. And then I'm not anywhere past there yet. I've just realized it's not worth fighting about, but then it really seems like a lot of the times when the women are ready, they really go down a real big rabbit hole, and they seem to really, really get into it. And I think that's really cool because I think that there's something like what you were saying, you discover St. Francis, and it's something that, you didn't know about that would have spoken to, the older version of you. There might be someone, maybe the current version as well. There's something kind of to appeal for everyone. Like you said, because it's true, there's so much there for the women. There's so much there for the hippie Catholics, for the traditional Catholics. There's a saint for everyone.
Right? Yeah, it's 100% true. It's very true, and I think in my wife's specific case, she come from a background where people would be arguing about the Bible on such a level that it would split up families, it would split up couples. People would just because there's no central authority to say, I'm the deal breaker, I'm the justice keeper, I'm the guy that
Hmm.
says that's how you read Matthew 16. That's how you read this. That's how you think about this, right? You need that. The
Hmm.
church needs that. Any human institution or organization that's effective needs the tiebreaker to decisively come through and say, yeah, let me clear that up for you because I
Hmm.
have the authority to do that. And it's a little of why I wouldn't be Orthodox, and it's a little why I wouldn't be a Protestant, because when we have the Bishop of Rome, he just comes through with that clarity, and we can go off that. That's what matters. And she saw that and said, wait a minute, that's a system of belief that wouldn't result in the chaos that I grew up in,
Hmm.
where everybody's arguing about how to read this obscure passage from the book of Exodus or what have you, right? So, um, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I have a good friend. He grew up Pentecostal, and a lot of those groups kind of have roots in that Pentecostalism, And I remember his church growing up split, I believe, over whether or not women had to only veil during church or whether or not women had to veil all the time, like in public. And
Right.
so like his uncle is on team veil all the time. So his uncle goes to a different church now, and his daughters and his wife veil all the time, and then his dad and his family, they don't do that. So the women only veil at church. Now all of a sudden, these two brothers, dad and uncle, are at two different churches.
It's unreal, especially with the decline of everything anyway. I mean, I live in a village of 250 people. There's one Catholic church, and then there's two Methodist churches. One's a free Methodist church, and the other's a United Methodist church. So I guess if you want to be free, you go with the one. If you want to be united, you go with the other.
Hmm.
But they're both empty. There
Yeah.
ain't nobody there, right?
Hmm.
And it's like you guys are running two separate buildings. You're in a town of 250 people in the middle of nowhere, but your differences are that I don't get it. I just
Yeah.
don't get it.
Yeah,
But
it's crazy. It's a level, it really allows your heart to kind of rest, and a level of worry you just don't have to deal with being Catholic. And it's easy to get yourself riled up with, oh, the Pope said this thing I don't like, or this thing happened that I don't like. But in the grand scheme of things, if you really think about it and accept it, it's just so peaceful. You can kind of just say, I don't have to understand, I don't have to be able to explain it. Just take your hands off the wheel, and you know that God's the one who's driving. So it's nice.
100%. Yeah, that's a good thing. Yeah, it's
Mhm.
very useful. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So another interesting thing, how has your perspective changed? You said the first time when you became a dad, you immediately, it changed for you. Same thing. Every man I know, as soon as he becomes a father, they just say there's something that changes. I'm not there yet. I'm excited for that to happen. What has kind of been some of the changes for you? Maybe just from like your thought perspective, how you've thought about things, how has your worldview or just anything changed since becoming a dad?
Well, I'll tell you this. My wife had our baby at home. Okay. We had midwives and such, and we had all kinds of it was an event. Wildest thing I've ever seen in my life. No
Hmm.
kidding. And I've seen wild things, but that was just unreal. Well, anyway, right after she gave birth, I mean right after she gave birth, not a minute goes by. And I felt a sensation inside my skull that was like a snapping twig. It was physical. It was chemical. There was something went just like the ringing of a bell. And I didn't. I just was like, wow, that's weird. And I was very tired, and it was very stressful, and it was kind of scary because you don't know. I mean, she could have had a problem or what have you, or when the baby comes out. Word to the wise, if you ever find yourself in a home birth scenario, the baby comes out looking dead because it's just waking up. It's new. And I looked at it and I thought, oh hell no, I can't. No. And then it starts moving, and you're like, oh man, I'm good, right?
Hmm.
So that being what it was, I thought, well, maybe my brain just snapped or whatever. Right? No, there was something change in my head, the way I
Hmm.
think about things, and that's just a fact. So how that's manifested has been unconventional in keeping with my whole life, I suppose. So it's nothing to be unexpected, but I don't know. I think my first thought was this place. Like I've gotten, I've had a penchant for decline and collapse and darkness and gloom for a lot of years because I find it interesting. It's neat to be in the place that nobody else wants to be, where the weather's rough and it's hard to do anything. It's hard to get anywhere, and it's economic depression. And so I like upstate New York. I'm fascinated by it. I'm obsessed with it. I go everywhere in the state. There's places on the map you couldn't even find them on a map, and I've been there. And that's just how I live. When now that I got the baby, it doesn't feel quaint anymore to be in a place where the median age is older than your local old folks' home, where there's no money, where everybody's demoralized, and half the houses are empty and crumbling and decaying, and there's drugs, and the guy that you go to high school with is in prison on a meth charge, and this, that, and the third, and it all adds up, and you say, "Whoa, wait a minute! I can sit here and drink beers on my porch and just sort of smirk at the breakdown of it all, which is kind of sick anyway."
Mhm.
But with a baby, with that baby, hell no, I can't. It just hit me like a ton of bricks. I can't raise my daughter here, man. And I'm from here. I love this place, and I've lectured everybody in the book. People say, "Oh, it's New York State, it's communist New York State. It's run by liberals who hate you and don't want you there." And it's like, yeah, sure, but it's America, and I'm not a coward, and I'm not going to run. That's my mentality, or it was, because now with the baby, I'm not making my last stand in a state where if I defend my daughter against some bad thing happening with a firearm that I'm legally carrying, the DA is going to throw me in jail and throw away the key,
Mhm.
right? That's crazy. I can't live in a place where that's their mentality because it's un-American. If I'm
Yeah.
going to be in America, let me be in America. I don't. If I wanted to go to Italy or Argentina or Mexico, I would do it, but it's another thing. It's not America. So
Mhm.
don't give me the half measure. And that's what New York State winds up being, except without the economic prosperity that California has. Because you
Mhm.
guys are run by a bunch of nutcases, but at least there's things going on. There's money, there's energy, right?
Mhm.
There's culture. Here,
Yeah.
it's just, you might as well drink antifreeze. That's the mentality. I'm not kidding.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that makes sense. It's very interesting. And California is kind of like that too because there's such a wide variety. I used to live in the Santa Maria Valley, which is in Central California, and they do a lot of different wine there. And I lived in a really small town. We didn't have a stoplight or anything, and everyone who lives there works in wine. And even then, kind of like what you're saying, it's rural. There's not a lot going on. There's no stoplight, whatever. I went to a church. It was the most embarrassing Novus Ordo church I've ever been to. All this different stuff while I lived there, but everyone's working in a booming industry, so everyone is making money and everyone's happy.
right.
I wasn't happy because I don't care about wine, so I eventually left. But you know, it's very interesting. So just to talk to the audience really quick, if anyone has specific questions they want to ask, I have one more main topic I want to ask Andy about, and then if you have any specific questions, there's one specific question I definitely want to ask him too that someone asked. But anything specific, feel free to drop it in the chat, and I will give it to him. So one other thing that I was kind of curious about, and this is just what you're talking about with your daughter, realizing that you don't want to have to make that stand in a place that isn't going to support you.
Right.
Um, a lot of people like what kind of has been the theme of this episode, people kind of coming for you for whatever you're saying. But one of the things someone had said, and this is what I thought was interesting, it was one of the homesteading guys, and he said, Hickman isn't the guy who stays and fights or goes and braves the world. He's a guy full of ideas and he likes to think about things, and but he's not the one who dedicates to the one thing. And I'm curious, from my outside perspective, I can see where he was coming from saying that. He's a homesteader guy, he's really committed. Once you have those animals and stuff, you're really locked in place. But it seemed to me that there was a lot of humility in you basically saying, I thought this was the, the thing I liked. And then I realized that that this isn't the place for me to be. And I respected that. It made a lot of other people mad. What do you say to the kind of person saying, you're an ideas guy, you're not a standing and doing something person? Is that true? Or is that maybe just you have a different idea of what it means to, stand or to commit to something?
Well, I don't want to talk like Lao Tzu or something, but like the conduit through which water flows is solid. Okay, to make a metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
But the conduit doesn't get recognition as a solid object. What gets recognition is the flowing water that comes out of the edge of it. And I think in the same way, to be a writer and to be a thinker is a little that way. Because I am an ideas man, but I'm firmly committed to being an ideas man. And I don't think that that's a cup and ball game. I think that that's a real thing. It's a vocation. I like thinking. I like spinning a beautiful story that could hopefully edify somebody who reads it. And namely, I want to fight against the crisis levels of suicide, depression, hopelessness. That to me feels like standing my ground on a thing that's worth something. Maybe it's not staked to a place. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because in many ways, it's true. I have a lot of ideas that I think are workable, and I spend a lot of time thinking about them, but I will never do them. Like, for example, North Dakota. My wife hates North Dakota. Okay. I love it. I would gladly live in North Dakota, but she doesn't want to do it. And I'm not being a tyrant. I'm not going to make her move up there. We're just probably never going to be in North Dakota. But I can tell you that if you move to such and such town, and I've got it all written down, you can find a house for 40 grand and be making 35 bucks an hour as a pipe fitter for such and such. And I already called them and I checked it out. So I can hand those dreams off to guys who need them.
Mm-hmm.
And lo and behold, it's happened. I know a guy who DM'd me, at least one of them, moved to North Dakota. He's making big bucks. He's paying nothing for rent. He's got his wife and his baby there. And he thanked me. He said, "This is great." Well, then there you go. My ideas lifestyle has done something good for somebody, that's a great thing, right? For me, if I'm going to stand firm on something outside of the realm of ideas and writing, honestly, I have to employ the same mentality as those with a more localist bent or what have you, and they kind of think in terms of tradition. I am one of the last remaining descendants of a continuously nomadic European descended lineage on Earth. There are not many of us left. That matters to me. That matters more than, oh, I'm going to move to, I'm going to move to St. Ansgar, Iowa with
Mm-hmm.
Wayne Roadcliffe, and I'm going to live there. And that's going to be my place, and I'm going to defend that place. It's like, that's of less value to me personally than maintaining that lineage of the nomadic way of life that was passed down to me through the generations. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
this is something that I think is worth holding on to and not letting it die. I do
Yeah.
believe that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. See, that's why I wanted to ask you, because I knew that you had I knew that you had a more nuanced understanding than maybe the guy who I was thinking about was, kind of giving you credit for. And I don't blame him, because I think that the type of mindset that it takes to make someone successful at being the person to learn how to homestead and to build a ranch that's successful, you kind of have to feel that one way about it. And you can't really blame that guy for that being his point of view, because that's the reason he's successful,
Of course, and I have many friends who are in the same wheelhouse, and God bless them. It's nothing for me, but I'm glad somebody's doing it. It's valuable stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, here's a good question. I think that this is kind of an insightful question. Cigar Mode is one of my good fans, and he says, does Hickman think you would have felt the same way about staying versus going where you were living if your child had been a son instead of a daughter?
That's interesting, man. I will have to concede that it's possible that I would have felt different, because it's like, what, I got it. I'm up at the house. I got the 4-wheeler. I got the canoe with the outboard and the beaver traps and the hunting guns. And it's like, yeah, if I was gonna have a little boy, I pretty much live in the ideal paradise for a little boy. I do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, or a little girl. I don't know. Maybe less so.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the same things would have cropped up, but probably slower
Mm-hmm.
would have been it. You know what I mean? And it's almost a blessing that they didn't, because
Yeah.
when you're staying somewhere, you get a certain amount of momentum going. It can be really hard to pull up the stakes, and right now it's like we could go anywhere. We barely lived at that house or any other. So
Yeah, that
you
makes
know,
sense. Here's another good one. What is your drink of choice for tonight? What are you drinking?
well, I'll show you two things. This is my cousin Ben, who, well, I won't tell you much about cousin Ben, but I got this thing for 50 cents, made in Canada. Praise God. And I got the Moosehead Lager,
There you go.
which is by the way, I'll tell everybody listening, that's the last beer that is actually made by Canadians in Canada by a Canadian owned company. There are no other major macro brew beers that are full blown Canadian. And so God bless Canada.
There you go. I didn't know that. Yeah. God bless Canada. God bless Moosehead beer.
Yes,
Um,
sir.
here's one. Let me see here. I'm trying to see what I'm going to read this out loud, and then maybe I'll try to rephrase it. He says, late 20s couple, Catholic male, agnostic female, both confirmed in their teens. Advice for bonding over understanding of faith. I don't know if you. I guess maybe you can speak on it. For you being the male in the situation and kind of being the one who set the standard. We're going to be Catholic. That's kind of part of what it means to get married in the Catholic Church. That's something you have to say. Um, how do you kind of feel about allowing for your wife to have, not putting pressure on her? That was something when I first converted, not like art. Like I really, well, a big breakthrough for me was realizing I couldn't argue her into being Catholic. So I guess what
Right.
was your kind of mindset with that in general?
I'll say the number one thing that matters to me, two things really. One is, well, three, I suppose. One is being friends with a priest is really good, I think. I'm very good friends with a Latin Mass priest. Comes to my house once in a while. He's a friend of mine. If you're watching, God bless your father. Um, he is interesting because he'll say things that I've said before better than I can say them to my wife, and she gets more out of it than she would if it just came from me, which is
Hmm.
valuable. And as a corollary to that, going to a church with a really solid coffee hour full of super thoughtful people. Every single time we go to any mass anywhere that has a really good coffee hour, my wife is blown away. It means, because for me, I'm the type of guy, I could just go to mass, I could pray the rosary, I could receive the Eucharist during the consecration of the Eucharist. I'm all right there. I'm fixated on that, and that's what matters to me, and that's everything to me. But for the uninitiated, it's a little like, well, all right, well, what is it going on here? This is strange, right?
Hmm.
So the way to understand that is to, go into the coffee hour sessions with the people, and it's great. And the third thing that I'll say is I just think to live life as pilgrims. You know what I mean? Because, and this is a little spooky. This is like a little, this is my little gypsy side, I guess, is when you're just living where you're not worried. A lot of people are worried. A lot of Catholics are very rational. They come through like autistic lawyers living in a computer simulation. Okay, that's what
Hmm.
they do, and they got this, that, and this, and if that, then this. Don't do any of that. One, women don't like that. But two, I mean, even men probably shouldn't get too far down that rabbit hole unless they're a bishop. You know, just
Hmm.
be simple. Let randomness kind of guide you. Just be a little mystical. Don't fear the mystical side of things where you say, I don't know. I'm giving it all to Jesus and I'm just going to trust him and I don't care what happens, even if it means my next meal.
Hmm.
And when you're living at all that way, even for a short time, that elucidates everything. And that makes everything, all of a sudden you're breathing it rather than thinking it. And
Hmm.
that's how you gotta approach it, I think. So anyway.
Yeah, that's great. I like that a lot. I think we had a great conversation. I think anyone who watched will get a real good feeling of who you are. If someone really liked the things you were saying, what is the best place for them to find you, for them to reach you, to support you? What is your plug?
Hickman's Hinterlands. Hickman's Hinterlands is my long form essay website. It's on Substack. And that's at shagbark.substack.com. That's how I make my living. So anyway, that's what I do.
Do you think you'll ever write a full-length book?
I have a book deal in the works presently, and in fact, starting tomorrow, I gotta work on a book proposal and start shopping it out to major book buyers. Yeah.
All right, awesome. Well, I think we're all glad to hear that. Thank you so much. Everyone go and buy a Moosehead beer. Everyone go subscribe to Hickman's Hinterlands. Thank you so much for your time. I'm going to end the stream. Thank you so much, everyone who supported. I really appreciate it. Next week, I have 2 videos coming out. One with Mike Pantile talking about Catholic masculinity, talking about the virtues of weightlifting, and then also with special guests who I've been telling you guys I was going to talk with for like over a month. John Horvat from American TFP. He's talking about the creation of, we're going to talk about creation of a Christian society, and we're also going to, he's going to give a Catholic critique of Curtis Yarvin and his, neo-reactionary ideas. So that's 2 videos. One will probably come out as a video. One will come out as a live stream. I'm not 100% sure. We'll see. But 2 videos instead of 1 for you next week. Thank you so much. Everyone go support Hickman, and that'll be the end of the stream for tonight. Good night.
All right.